Year 10 and welcome to the final lesson, final PowerPoint on poetry. So this is the final one we're going to go through in terms of the quotations. So I'm going to give you one interpretation of the poem today, and at the end of the PowerPoint there's going to be some alternative interpretations as well that you can think about, and perhaps we'll go over when we get to in September. Probably not then, but when we go back to school anyway. Okay, so for the start of today, you just need to do some knowledge recall of the Prelude from lessons this week. So just pause the video and have a go at those now, please. Okay, here's the answers then. So what does the word elfin mean? It means fairy or elf-like. It has also got some impish quality to it as well. The opening quotation, one summer evening led by her. What has been personified here? That's nature. What form of poetry is a prelude? It is part of an epic narrative poem. So this is a section of the poem we're reading. It's not a full poem, but it's part of an epic narrative poem. It's also autobiographical. It's about a memory of when Wordsworth was a young boy. And the poem can be split into three clear feelings about this experience. Can you name them? So if you've got phrases a bit similar to this, that's great. The first one is at the beginning, the poem, the boy seems confident and carefree. Then he's fearful when he sees the mountain looming above him. And then when he gets home, he's kind of reflective and troubled. So if you've got any words similar to that, brilliant, thank you. You can also use that as one of your structure points for the poem as well. The fact that the feeling changes as we go through, and we've got three clear feelings in the poem. So you can talk about that as a structural point. Right, so let's get on with the lesson for today. So today we're going to analyse the key quotations for the poem, The Prelude. There are quite a few quotations to copy down if you haven't got your anthology, because we're going to be looking at some quotations that are linked together across the poem to get you a higher mark. So it is worth doing. So what we have done is, I'll just get you to copy down the quotations first of all before we look at the poem, is we've made you some knowledge organisers now for the poems. This is just the section on quotations for the Preludes. There's other sections of the knowledge organiser as well. So I've just screen grabbed that for you. So what I would like you to do is write these 6 groups of quotations and leave space around each group to make the annotations. Okay, so that one, that one, that one, that one, that one, and that one. And pause the video, copy them down, and then we'll go through the poem in a bit more detail. Thank you. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to remind you of what happens in the poem, and then we'll go through each of those quotations, okay? So spend a few minutes rereading the poem and looking at my magnificent illustrations. So just to remind you, he goes in the evening, he goes to the willow tree, there's a boat tied to the willow tree. He takes the boat, which is a bit of a brave thing to do. He just takes it, and as a young boy decides he's going to row out onto the lake. So he's kind of fearless, and he doesn't worry at all about what's happening. So he goes out on this boat, and everything about it seems really magical. He fixes his view to the top of the ridge, and he rows that way. So he's looking back at where he's been. The stars are out, the water's glittering, and he is really proud of how he's rowing this boat. He's got lots of skill because it's all becomes quite streamlined behind him. Okay, here. But as he carries on going, where he has fixed his viewpoint, because he's gone further back now in his boat, he can now see this big mountain looming behind the first one where he was first looking at. and he becomes absolutely terrified. Now, it's important to understand that he's not just terrified because it looks like a monster. He's terrified because he didn't know it was there, and it's like, oh, well, if I didn't know that, then what else don't I know? It's almost like a realization that actually I don't know everything. Man doesn't know everything, and actually this is scary because I didn't realize I didn't know everything. I thought I knew everything that was here, but I clearly don't, and this looks really, really scary. And so he freaks out, he turns around and he rows back quickly. And when he gets back home, in this part of the poem, we understand that this has really changed his feelings about everything. This has put him in a low mood. There's a darkness that hangs over him, and that he feels haunted by this image. And you could say that he has been terrified by this experience, and it's giving him nightmares. Or you could say that his perspectives have changed, and actually he realizes now that he doesn't know everything, and he's grown up slightly and realized that his innocence has gone to the world. It's not exactly as he expected it to be. Okay, so if you need to just reread the poem, just pause the video and you've got time to read it. So like we said before, this is an autobiographical poem, part of an epic poem, and explores the power of nature and can be considered as an allegory, the hidden meaning for self-discovery and growing up, like I just said. Copy down the quotations and let's get on with our annotations then. So the first one's really simple. You just need to copy down that at the opening of the poem, nature is personified as female, so led by her being nature. So this sets us up for the idea that actually nature is really powerful because we are influenced by nature, we want to follow it, we're enticed by it, we want to go and see what it's like, and certainly Wordsworth did. Wordsworth felt the magnetic power of nature and really was enjoying going to look at nature. So therefore nature is personified as female and is powerful and enticing. So if you just copy that down, it's brilliant. I have got an extension point for this. Now, I've got extension points for lots of the annotations. You only need to copy down the bits with the copy next to it. But if you want to extend yourself further, you can copy down the extension points if they make sense to you. Otherwise, you can just ignore them, okay? So as an extension point, I wanted you to think about the fact that at the beginning of the poem, man, if we take, for example, Wordsworth as Wordsworth's childhood memory here as being representative of mankind. At the beginning of the poem, man and nature seem somewhat equal, even though the nature is leading the way. He's describing nature as her, using the same sorts of pronouns, I, her, he, those sorts of things. So because of that, it seems like he feels that there's a connection between him and nature. And at the beginning, they seem somewhat equal. That's just an extension point. Now, copy that down if you understand it. Don't worry about it otherwise. Okay, the next one then. So the next one, you've got quotations from all over the first part of the poem. And in the first part of the poem, we've got this magical experience, and we can see that through this positive imagery to describe the journey. So we've got glittering, we've got the small circles in the moon are glittering idly. We've got sparkling light, we've got the stars, nothing above him but the stars and a grey sky, and the boat is described as an elfin pinnace. So we've got the boat is like a sailing ship, and elfin's kind of fairy-like, so everything feels very magical and fantasy-like. So we've got the semantics of fantasy, and this really just shows Wordsworth's love of nature and presents the memory as being really idyllic, really beautiful and really lovely image. So you need to copy down this bit in blue here. And just like the previous slide, I think I've done an extension. Let's have a look, have I? Yes, I have. The other thing you can add to this, if you want to, you don't have to, is that this is all kind of sibilant. There's lots of S sounds throughout this passage, this first bit, particularly in the quotations I've asked you to copy down. We've got sparkling light, the stars, elfin pinnace, that's sounds. And here this really adds to the magical feeling about this memory. The reason I've asked you to copy this sibilant down if you're going for the extension is because it links to something later in the poem as well. Okay, it contrasts quite heavily with later in the poem. So in this section, therefore, man and nature are living in harmony, and this is all very idyllic. Pause the video and copy that down. However, we have now a turning point in the poem. We call that a volta, which is a structural point for poetry. And a volta in the poem marks a shift in tone, a shift in the feeling, and therefore the language changes to reflect that feeling as well. So from behind the craggy steep till then, this is when he starts to see the other mountain appearing behind the first one. So his view of everything changes. Everything is different from what he first expected. And from here on in, the language becomes far more dark and threatening as the mountain looms. So you just need to copy that down, that there's a volta in the poem, and that the language from here on in becomes much darker and threatening. And from here on in, the extension point is that actually man isn't equal to nature. Nature is surprising and cannot be controlled by man. We don't necessarily understand everything about nature. Okay, so Wordsworth was quite comfortable as a young boy going out on this boat. Very magical experience. And then all of a sudden, everything changes when he realises he actually doesn't know everything. He didn't know that everything was there. Okay, pause and copy those points. Remember only to copy the extension if you want to. You don't have to. Okay, so now we're looking at the language of how the language has changed to create this threatening and intimidating side of nature. So I'll just read this section to you. So when from behind a craggy steep, I should say till then, I don't know what I've done there, that shouldn't be there. The horizon's bound, a huge peak, black and huge, as if with voluntary power instinct upreared its head. I struck and struck again, and growing still in stature, the grim shape towered up between me and the stars. So this is a description of the mountain that he hasn't seen looming above him before. And this personification here really adds to this threatening and intimidating side of nature. We could say that he is intimidated and scared because of the absolute size of this mountain. And that's pretty much what I would like you to say at the moment. But we could also think that it's more about the fact that he didn't know that was there. And if he didn't know that was there, what else doesn't he know that's there? And goodness me, he thought he knew everything, but actually he doesn't. And nature is surprising and therefore threatening. Lovely quotation of towered between me and the stars. That really contrasts from earlier in the poem. I should have put this as an extension point actually. Only copy this bit down if you are going for a higher grade. This towered up between me and the stars contrasts with the positive description of nothing but the stars and the grey sky earlier in the poem. And that really shows how our perspectives can change. Okay, this can be linked to the idea of growing up and the transforming experiences memory has had. So we can look at, if we think about, you can perceive something when you're younger, we can look at something when you're younger, and then when you're older and you realise the other side to that, it can be quite overwhelming and quite scary. And this is what's happened in this experience. He is just seeing a different perspective of nature, and therefore, wow, that's not what he expected. It's like he's growing up. And that's a further extension. The sibilants here, because we've got sibilants in this bit as well. Growing still in stature, the grim shape, and stars, still, stature, shape, stars. Here, very different tone to the beginning where there was circles glittering and Alpheum pinnace and sparkling light. Here, the tone is very sinister in comparison to the positive tone at the beginning of the poem, everything's flipped on its head, and the same language feature now sounds, because of the words it's used with, the same language feature now sounds quite scary. So everything has changed in his viewpoint. Okay, and nature has now become quite intimidating and threatening. So copy down those points, please, whichever ones are relevant. Okay, this one's a nice simple one, the repetition of no. So at the end of the poem, everything has changed for him. He's got no familiar shapes remained, no pleasant images of trees or sea or sky, and no colours of green fields. The only thing that remains are these huge and mighty forms. So there's an absence of all those idyllic, beautiful images that he used to see as a child. So this shows how his view of nature and its power has completely changed. His view has been completely altered by this experience. It's had a significant impact on him. He understands, he sees nature differently. Okay, so you just need to copy that down. Thank you. I think this is the final quotation, isn't it, that I asked you to copy down. But huge and mighty forms that do not live like living men moved slowly through my mind by day and were a trouble to my dreams. So this is the final line of the section of the poem we've been given, and it shows the effects of feeling so insignificant and overwhelmed by nature that are long lasting to the poet. So these images, he can't escape them. They're always in his head. They're always in his dreams, and it's as if the power of nature has surprised him, and all of a sudden he's become very overwhelmed by it. Okay, so you can copy that idea down. I have got an extension that's quite advanced, so listen up if you want to hear this, otherwise you can forward on. So throughout the poem, there's a magical fairy tale semantic field. Okay, so we've got at the beginning of the poem, we've got all the ideas of the glittering and the elfin pinnace and all of those kind of words that make it seem like this journey in nature is a pleasant and magical one. This links to the idea of it being a childhood memory. He's used fairy tale language in a very clever way because this is a childhood memory and it gives us that feeling of it being about innocence and childhood. However, at the beginning of the poem, the connotations about being delicate and magical. Wordsworth is enjoying the fairy tale experience, he's enjoying being he sees nature as fairy tale, and he sees one side of that fairy tale. He sees, like we tend to as children actually, he sees the heroic, beautiful, fairy-like image of nature. But in the second half of the poem, the fairy tale semantics remain, they stay the same, but they're different. They're now a giant and a monster. So these are all the villains of the fairy tale, if you like. And this is the bit that stays with him at the end, the bits that terrify him and give him nightmares. So it shows that nature can be both parts of a fairy tale. They can be the hero, they can be pleasant, they can be fairy-like, but they can also be this ferocious monster. And this is about him seeing both sides of nature. Nature is powerful, it's unpredictable, but that becomes the overriding feeling he has at the end of the poem. At the beginning of the poem is all the innocence in nature and how he sees himself as sort of equal to nature, and by the end of the poem he doesn't. He realizes that nature is far more powerful than he is, and it haunts him and scares him. So the only thing, if you want to go for a highest grades, 8 or 9, I would talk about how the fairy tale semantic field changes throughout the poem. Okay, I've got one more thing to tell you, so you can copy that down, pause and copy that down if you want to. I've got some alternative interpretations here. Again, you only need to listen up and copy these down if you're going for the highest grades. You can listen for interest if you want to, and of course you can copy it down. But if you are up to the hour, please don't feel like you need to listen to this bit necessarily, because we will go over it again in when we come to revise the poems. So overall, the overriding interpretation is that the relationship, the nature is powerful, and this experience has had a significant impact on Wordsworth. This memory of nature has had a significant impact on him. Here are a couple of alternative interpretations. I'm not going to go into any detail, but you can copy them down and think about them if you want some alternative interpretations for now. So the first alternative interpretation is man versus nature. That at the beginning of the poem, man's treatment of nature is quite selfish, as if nature is theirs. So the boy in the poem, so Wordsworth, stealing the boat, being confidently riding across the lake. It's all about his pride and his sense of pride in what he's doing. And then in the story, the boy realizes that nature is actually more powerful and man is somewhat insignificant. So we could see this poem as about the idea of man versus nature, and actually nature is far more powerful than man treats it. Man treats it as if it owns nature, but actually it doesn't. Man does not own nature. Nature is more powerful, and we're just an insignificant part of that nature. The second interpretation is that the poem could be an allegory for growing up. When we are young, we see the magic in everything, don't we? Absolutely see the magic in everything. And then our perspectives change as we see the enormity of the problems in the world. Once your perspective has changed, you cannot go back to the innocence of youth. So we can see that as an allegory throughout the poem. At the beginning, the young boy sees everything as magical as he's going out. But then when he starts to see the reality, in this case, the reality of nature, reality of the enormity of it, you see that as a metaphor for all of the issues and horrific things in the world. As part of our growing up process, we start to see the reality of life. And as you have, no doubt, particularly in lockdown, and once you start to change, I imagine many of you can't really remember those feelings of being little and everything being sort of being in awe of everything. Like, for example, my daughters can sit there, well, not so much now because they're growing up, unfortunately, but they're quite little, and one of them can just sit and look at a daisy for ages, really looking at it and like really describe it to me, things that we just take for granted nowadays. And I think once you start to grow up and see the wider world, you don't necessarily go back to that innocence of youth. And this poem could be seen as a metaphor for that, and the allegory of growing up. Okay, so I'm not going to go into any more detail on that, so just make sure you've got your notes copied down, and if you have any questions, just message your teachers. And that is the final bit of annotation you're going to be doing on the poems. Be you, and hopefully we're going to be doing some more stuff on description and setting you up for next year as well. We really look forward to seeing you all next week in school, and that's it. So thank you very much.